Good evening. Hello, I am Larry Rodarte, and I am here at the Alpha Media Studios, WSGW, and I'm inviting everybody to come on into the room so we can live stream my show today. If you have any questions or comments and you want to, you got a question on the subject matter, go ahead and leave it because we want to invite you to be a part of the show. This is Mi Gente on Air, my people on air, and although we target this to the Latino community, we want to make sure that everybody feels welcome because it brings a great awareness to the greater community. So please come on into the room and leave your comments or your concerns or your questions because we're here tonight to bring this show to you, the audience, Mi Gente on Air. So we'll be right back and we're going to go right into the show.
Welcome to Mi Gente on Air on 100.5 and 790 News Radio WSGW and online WSGW.com. Now, here is your host, Larry Rodarte.
Good evening and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Mi Gente on Air. Although the show is targeted to Latino concerns, contributions, and culture, we welcome everyone to participate and listen. As the leaves have turned and this fall season is upon us, many within the Latino community are anticipating Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, which has really gained momentum in America in the last several years since the movie Coco by Disney. Didn't they do a great job on that? Well, the Saginaw Art Museum is having their third annual Dia de los Muertos celebration, while Saginaw's Unión Cívica Mexicana is presenting their 13th celebration on November 2nd. And we will talk more about each of these events. But first, my guest today is a producer of a family documentary entitled Michoacan to Michigan that tells their history of fleeing their homeland of Mexico due to the Mexican Revolution to Michigan. I know many descendants can relate to their story. The documentary will be shown at 1 p.m. on Saturday, October 29th at the Art Museum in Saginaw. So let's welcome Len Radjuski to Mi Gente on Air. Hello, Len. How are you?
I'm doing great, Larry.
Well, I really liked the shirt that you're wearing, Michoacan. It's a beautiful state in Mexico, and I have my family there as well. And Morelia, Michoacan is a state that your family originates from, correct?
Correct.
That's the city. And I want you to tell my listeners exactly who you are and your background pertaining to this documentary.
Well, thanks again. I'm one of 70 first cousins of my grandparents, Valeriano and Martina Fraga. And our family here has been around over 100 years now. And while I was growing up, we got to have a special time at a farm in Inley City, not that far from here. It was my grandfather's first farm of his own, and he got it when he was 60 years old. And before that, he had been share farming in the Thumb area. And so going back to the farm, it's become this iconic place that all my cousins relate to, because as we grew up, any given weekend, the family gathered, and sometimes it was just getting together, and other times people were working and the kids got to play. And we bonded like few people get the chance to do. And so I grew up with that, and we almost take it for granted that we have such a large family and a welcoming family and that we get together all the time. And that was just the farm, let alone all the events. So I've grown up steeped in the family.
Yeah. And, I preluded this show on my social media, on my Facebook account, to my Dias family here in Saginaw, because I said this story is so similar to ours. This is our story. What Len is going to be talking about tonight with the documentary Michoacan to Michigan, there's probably a number of different families in our area or in the mid-Michigan area that have similar stories and have similar experiences. And it's funny because Valeriano, your great grandfather or grandfather?
Grandfather.
That's the same name as my father, Valeriano. So I mean, there's just so many similarities, and so this is kind of like my heart, and I'm really happy to have you here today to talk about this. How did Michoacan to Michigan come about, and who had the foresight to actually record your grandparents? I mean, because you've got them in English and Spanish, which is pretty amazing.
Two components. How it came to be is in our family. There's a story about that when he and his wife got to San Antonio, he was recruited to come to Michigan. And when he was approached, do you want to go to Michigan? He initially thought it was Michoacan, and he didn't know English, and that was a very, understandable confusion. And in the family, I was hearing back and forth. Well, he got on the train, and next thing you knew, he was Michigan. They didn't know what's going on. But I said, nah, I don't know of that. So I wanted to get to the bottom of, did he really know that he was going to Michigan and not Michoacan? Well, I was teaching video production at the time at a high school in Huron Valley Schools down the road a little bit. And I always encouraged my students to use the equipment that they had available to do their own stories on top of the work I was giving them to do. And I said, hey, I've got these facilities as well. So I did the same thing and modeled and decided to start some research and dig into it. And I laid out a timeline and did all this research to try to get to the bottom of it. Well, as Larry alluded to, is two of my uncles had the foresight, and they both were technically inclined to have reel-to-reel recorders in the early 70s.
Wow.
And they got them out, and they set up the microphones. And we even left in, when you hear the movie and these pieces are there, you'll hear my little cousin Kevin in the background, because it was just in their kitchen telling their stories. Mm-hmm. And actually another cousin who's going to be at the Saginaw Art Museum presenting, he's an artist now, he also did a version. So there were 3 different versions I had out there of my grandparents telling their own story. And I did all this research, and I looked around, I had all this stuff. And after about 2 years, I go, wait a minute, they're the story. Mm-hmm. And I went back to the basics. I use their own words, and then we fill in the blanks, or brought the story along. But it was all there, and it's powerful to hear their own words up on the big screen.
And the reel-to-reel tapes in those days, because my brother had a reel-to-reel tape, my brother Robert, and like I would play with it all the time, and they were the big round things, and they would go really fast, but the quality on there is really good. I still have tapes back from those days as well of just me, fooling around on there, but it was the quality is so good, and that's what really struck me when I listened to your advertisement for the documentary. When you hear your grandparents, because you hear it and it's done very well.
It was a challenge in some ways, because these are old tapes. Yet at the same time, some of those old technologies still hold up, mm-hmm. because they're basic and they didn't try to do too much. Sometimes some of the technology got away from itself.
Yeah. So the story begins in the beautiful state of Michoacan, right? Which is a beautiful area down by Mexico City, actually. It's about 2 or 3, 4 hours away from Mexico City. But during the time of the revolution, the Mexican Revolution, which started in 1910, chaos erupted throughout the country. And the turbulent times that you talk about, or your family talks about in the history, in the unrest of the Mexican Revolution, is what drew them here. Tell me about that, what you know.
Well, as we say in the film, it was a chaotic time.
Yes.
And a quick byline or aside is that I always wondered how the family in Mexico was going to take to our portrayal of the revolution and conditions. And they seemed to think we did a decent job. But according to my grandfather and everything we've heard, and now even backed up with my conversation with Larry beforehand, is that it wasn't just the revolution. It was just a sense of lawlessness going on.
Yes.
And there were many different factions, and it was just crazy everywhere. And sure enough, the people in these small villages and towns were just being swallowed up by it all with not much recourse for it.
Yeah, brutalized. And I remember in somewhere in the documentary, or in its advertisement of it, you said if they wanted it, they took it. They just took it.
That's what my grandfather says in his words. He goes, if they want it, they just took it, and so you couldn't resist. And
so one of the things in my Dias family history, that is very well known throughout, and we have a huge, large family. The last census at our family reunion, I think in 2013, was 926 people. So now I'm sure it's 10 years later, I'm sure it's over 1,000. But one of the things that everybody knew, was that our great grandfather was hung during the revolution. And it was that incident that made them come to America for the better life. Is there a particular incident that happened with your grandparents, or something that they alluded to that made them flee Mexico?
And that's how synchronicitous this get together is with you, because that's what he says in almost those words. They were hanging people, and they wanted something, and he said they would just hang you. And he said they just did it. And my conversation with you earlier is that there's a real life example of talking to somebody who had that in their family. So it wasn't just talk or hyperbole, exaggeration. It truly was what they were experiencing.
Yeah, I remember, and these stories were just handed down. These are just handed down, and luckily there was somebody who had the fortitude to tape your grandparents. Nobody in my family actually did, my grandparents, they passed away in the 60s. These were my great grandparents. My grandparents died later, but one of the things that I remember, was that my great grandfather worked in the trains in America. And he was sending money back to Guandacareo, which was the city that is near Morelia by your family. And the Chavistas, the bandits, they were coming in, and they said, "We know there's money being brought here. We want it." And my great-grandmother, Cecilia Rosales Diaz, her father-in-law said, "No matter what, do not give them that money." And she hid it in a fireplace in a brick. And this was told by her sister later. I remember hearing her talk about this in Spanish, but it was that was the reason she didn't give the money. She never gave it up, and that's why they hung her father-in-law.
Well, I think what you bring up is why I'm proud and happily not surprised that as we have shown this film to different groups, not just Mexican-American families, but definitely them, many families seem to have similar types of stories told firsthand by our ancestors, not ancestors, grandparents, and that they truly experience those. And you can tell from their voices what an amazing experience they had to live through. And it's all this is corroborated talking with you about your family's experience, because we have those same similar types of.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I think when we know our family history, where where you come from, I've always kind of been a proponent in saying that you're a much stronger person. And I feel that sometimes I get my strength as a person. I think I'm a pretty strong person, but I get my strength from knowing that family history and knowing where I come from, and that I am their American dream, And I wanted to ask you personally, what did you learn? What did you gather from, I guess I want to say, as the knowledge came from these family tales down to you and your kids?
I just compare my life with what they went through, and going back to Mexico now a number of times over the years and seeing firsthand a rough idea of how they lived. And you'll see it in the film if you get a chance to see it. I hope you do someday. Is that those words by my grandparents over and over again, they were all about us, the next generations coming along. And when they say we suffered, but we didn't mind, they lived it. And little things like I said earlier, when he got his very first farm of his own at 60 years old, and most of us here many of us, I shouldn't say most, are thinking about retirement if we can. He's starting this farm that was in rough shape, but it had good land.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think of that often, where, their lives and what they left were very, very meager in terms of possessions, but it didn't matter. We are what they left.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell me, you mentioned this farm, and we have a similar farm. It was on Wolf Road in Saginaw. And anytime we allude to the farm, it's always a feeling of good feeling, because the family gatherings there, and they were poor, yet they were always rich in family love and in vegetables and food and the cows and everything else. And we have a family cookbook. It's called the Dias Cookbook, where it has recipes that we have shared through the years that come from actually great grandma Cecilia and some of the other women in the family. But where was the farm, the Frega farm? And when you talk about that you came to Michigan, at one point, your grandparents, they lived in Saginaw, and your grandfather worked at the Gray Iron Foundry, right? Tell us
Correct.
about that.
When they first came, there was work at the foundry, so of course he did that. But he was used to being outdoors and a farmer and a cowboy, a caballero,
Mm-hmm.
and he would work in the farms more and more and more. And over time, they ended up. I'm still learning, and maybe people out there in this area can lend some background to this, but it'd be a sharecropping or share farming, where the whole family, they'd have a house on the property that our family would live in, and they would manage, and there's some kind of arrangement for food and sometimes money or livestock or something. And they went through a series of farms over the years in this area, the Claude Wood Farm and the Ziegenhart Farm. These are names in our family that live on, because some of these families truly helped our family, helped them learn how to cook American foods, or how to give them a cow to have milk. Or my grandfather, because of his work with horses back in Mexico, got to be known as a person who could work with horses, draft horses up here.
Mm-hmm.
And all those things came together. And as the sons and daughters started going to school here and became part of the community, you could see a progression in the family over the years. And we have hundreds of photos of that we started our own family website in the last year that make this available to our whole family, because it helps keep that legacy and history alive.
Yeah, definitely. And it's important. And I think when I have been involved in the community, I at one point was involved with the Great Lakes Bay Hispanic Leadership Institute. And one of the first things that when we gathered students, young adults, we're talking, 18 and plus, some were up to 40. I told them, I said, do you know where you are from, your family ancestry, and what city your grandparents lived in? And for the most part, most did not know. And so that was part of the assignment, that we would say, okay, find out who your great grandparents were, where did they originate in Mexico, because that's probably where they were from. And let's tell that story, because as I said, I think when you know where you come from, you become a stronger person than if you don't have any background or any information. And I don't mean that just,
No. Any culture, any ethnicity. And I tell everybody, it is so easy now, relatively to those reel-to-reel recording, with folks with their smartphones. And that's a project we'd like to get going again, because my video teaching background is helping students start recording. You got to start now is the time to start, whatever that now is, and start talking to your grandparents and get that information and capture it and add to it. It's just and then as you start looking into it, there are a surprising amount of records as you learn how to find them in Mexico, birth records and marriage records. And
they did a really good job at that in the churches, didn't they?
Yes. When I went to this little town, or not even a town, Chiquimitillo, and on the walls, you can see our family names up there, the Fraga and Erejon and different names. There's history there that you can go back and find, even if you don't know it now.
And is the Fraga name, is that Spanish from Spain oriented, or because I don't hear that name often?
We believe so. We believe it's from northern Spain, Galicia. One of my relatives, when I went back in the 90s, was a heart surgeon, and he had the oral history. And he went on for 45 minutes, and I recorded that. And he talked about the two brothers from Spain. And we're trying to corroborate and cross, what do you call that when you do?
Six, what is that?
Well,
Jonathan?
just
Cross-reference.
Yeah. So you pick up a little tidbit from something, and then you go and find it over there. And it's this big puzzle, and new stuff is always being found.
Yeah.
So I encourage everybody to start now if you haven't already. The tools are much more available now than they ever have been.
Yeah. In the genealogy ancestry online is very good. They're coming out with all these census now from the 30s, 40s, I think maybe even the 50s. And you can actually see, if you look up and you sign on, you can actually see your ancestors that came to Michigan now in the early days.
One quick thing I want to throw in, though, through these 30 years of research now for me, and it's still never ending, is I've come to understand a little bit better how proud Mexicans are of Mexico. Yes, there's some Spanish lineage potentially, and that's important, but it's interesting to me to watch how they say, but we're here and we're proud of Mexico, and that's who we are now. We're Mexicans. And so, yes, both Errejón, we believe, and Fraga are both not, quote, common Mexican names in a way. But as we learn more and more, the influences in Mexico from France and Germany and different world powers, let alone the indigenous cultures that have been there forever, it's a big mixing pot of its own.
And that's where we get kind of the whole idea that we're going to talk about a little later in the show about Dia de los Muertos and how that came about and how we celebrate it today in America with the fusion of the Aztecs and the Mayans with the Catholicism and the Christianity of Europe and how it came together and how we're celebrating it now today. But I want to mention that when we talk about looking up ancestors, and if you haven't done that, it's much easier today, like you alluded to, because I remember doing that in the 90s, and the government of Mexico did not keep records of your family, but it was the Catholic churches, and every church is on a corner, right, in Mexico. Well, if you went to the Church of Latter-day Saints, part of what they had to do was look up their ancestry, and so you could go through these microfiches and actually look up these names, and I found birth records and marital records, death records. I mean, everything was really it was really recorded in the Catholic churches, and for the most part, in the early turn of the 18th, 19th, 20th century, most Mexicanos were Catholic in those days, and so, it really is something to do your own family research. And, obviously the Fraga family has really done a great job, and they are sharing it with the community, and they're going to be sharing it at the Saginaw Art Museum on October the 29th at 1 p.m., the showing during the Saginaw Art Museum celebration of Dia de los Muertos. So I want to encourage everybody to come on out to view the documentary, Michoacan to Michigan. And I don't think any other state in Mexico could say that and have the ring, Michoacan to Michigan. If it was like Zacatecas to Michigan, it just doesn't have that flair.
Well, even my grandfather would say there actually are a surprising number of lakes in Michoacan.
Yeah.
For when people think of Mexico often, they don't envision lots of lakes. And as I've come to know it, there's just lakes, many more than you'd see in other places. And it reminded my grandfather of Michoacan being here in Michigan with our lakes. It's not exactly the same by any means, but much more water than people would.
Well, where my great grandmother was from in Guandacareo, Michoacan, they're known for the hot springs of water in the lakes that you can bathe in. And I've been in those, and it's really amazing, those hot springs, because they are quite warm and all. But, we've got a lot to still talk about. I'm so happy to have Len. How do you say your last name?
Rajeski, although I'm working on Fraga to be better about that, and I need to do it for my Polish side too.
Well, we're going to talk with Len when we come back, and we're going to talk more about Michoacan to Mexico and how they're going to be showing this at the Saginaw Art Museum for their Dia de los Muertos celebration. We'll be right back. So there you have it. We're talking with Len, and it's Rajewski. I was saying Rajewski, but
Most
you say
people do.
Rajewski.
Rajeski,
Yes.
But I'm fine.
Well, there's got to be a story there too, right? But it's a wonderful celebration of family culture and life and heritage, and I know that that's one of the things that the Civica here in Saginaw, when the founders in 1945 founded the Civica, they wanted to retain the culture and heritage of Mexico, and that was one of three reasons why they formed the organization, because as children were assimilating into the school systems and all, many of the teachers said to the parents, don't teach the kids Spanish, and we actually lost that part of our heritage, which was a real disservice. And I think that we now know this, and it's part of the history of our community. And what I mean by that is the Mexicanos, the Mexican Americans of the mid-Michigan area. And that's not with everybody, but a majority, especially my generation, they don't speak Spanish, and it's hurt us along the way. And here I am. I'm not fluent in Spanish. I know a lot of Spanish, but I'm not fluent the way I should be. And so, it's really important. I forgot why I was bringing that point up, but it's important that, we talk about the history and culture and heritage of our families and our people, because it's beautiful. And the Fraga family in this documentary is beautiful, and I really want to encourage everybody out there to come on out. And if you've got questions or concerns, like I said, because I'm sure that as you're watching this, and I see that those of you in the room, thoughts are coming into your head about, wow, my family this, my family that, because that's just human nature and who we are. But Len, did you want to say something to that?
Well, two quick things. One is I will actually be lucky enough to be in Morelia for Noche de Muertos at the time of the show, because I had already planned the trip. But in my stead, 3 of my cousins will be there who are prepared to answer questions, to provide more information. So if you're able to make it, feel free to share stories and our similarities. And I also want to say that it's meant to be a starter, to get that out there, and then let's do follow up as your family or your connections, or we'll work through Larry to find ways to connect with me or whoever to, if you have questions, and let him know. We'll follow that up.
Well, that's one of the questions we're going to go, but we need to get back into the show, because that's the conversation we're having here, right? Okay.
Very good.
We'll be right back going into Mi Gente on Air.
This is Mi Gente on Air on WSGW.
Welcome back to Mi Gente on Air, and we are celebrating Michoacan to Mexico, a documentary film, and we have the producer here. It's his family's tale, Len Rajewski. Rajeski.
No problem.
It's difficult because I've got both names in my head, but we were talking a little bit as we were on the social media platform there. We were talking about how this is like a stepping stone for other family members when they see the documentary. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, as we've been able to show the film more and more in the last couple of years, although we took some time off during the COVID situation, more and more stories are emerging from other families, and we have more and more connections. And I think it's important that we all connect with each other, support each other, find out what other people are doing to raise the awareness of our culture and our heritage, and that we're here. With a name like Rajeski, we've been talking about it, no one would ever guess that I'm half Mexican. And that's one of the things. Sometimes I let things go on for a little while before I will bring up, oh, by the way, I'm half Mexican. And it's interesting to watch. And I think that's what I hope again, the film can do is be a part of raising awareness and understanding that our families, Larry's and mine, and many, many, many others have been here for decades, over a century. So we're part of the American fabric. And how do we proudly let people know that we're here and we're contributing?
Yeah, and I got to say this just because I'm living it now and I've lived it in the past, but it just seems, as of maybe post-pandemic, maybe leading into the pandemic, I'm not sure. And I'm just doing this as a time reference, but it just seems like there's much more awareness to bring the Latino culture to the forefront in America now. And it hasn't always been that way. Sometimes in the past, especially when I was in high school, we tried to hide, our Mexicanism, if you will, and it was difficult. And it was, when we were with those that were non-Hispanic, we tried to hide maybe our tacos or, when we were at lunch, right? And it's like now it's like we're celebrating the Mexican foods and the food trucks and just the whole idea of Dia de los Muertos. And it's a beautiful thing. It's really beautiful for me to witness and see this. I don't know if you feel the same way. How do you feel about it, Len?
About
The Mexican culture being celebrated now much more, because we went through a period not too long ago where it was looked down upon.
And it's still somewhat under attack. And that's part of what we want to do is say, wait, there's much more to what being a Mexican American is all about. And so I'd agree, but you see it in music, you see it in food, you see it in sports, you see it across the culture, that the contributions have been many from Hispanics and Latinos in general and the Mexican Americans. So I think you're right. It's great to see the level of confidence and wanting to share. A quick little aside, to me, what I've been trying to do more and more is I'm half Mexican. So obviously my daughters are quarter and my grandkids are eighth. Yet that Mexican thread still shows up in my granddaughters. And that's what I'm proud of, is that how do we keep it alive and realize there are many other things, but right now I'm mostly concerned, hopefully the Polish part of my family doesn't get too upset here, but I'm really concerned about keeping that fire alive in my granddaughters, and the same with my nieces and nephews and future generations. So I think that awareness, I think we contribute as individuals on an everyday basis and kind of support what might be going on in the culture at the same time.
Yes. And you talk about contributions, and one of the things I wanted to bring up, because I'm thinking of interviewing him on my show here, is the Detroit Lions has a player of Mexican ancestry, descent, Malcolm Rodriguez, and he's making waves, and the Lions are, they're a great team. We support them no matter what, and they're going to win this Sunday, but it's important that when we do have those individuals, and he may be the first, we don't know, but that we celebrate that. We celebrate just like, what they celebrate at the University of Michigan Musical Society with the Ballet Folklorica, Alma Hernandez, when they came earlier this year, and Ada Cuevas is coming November the 2nd, the great singer of Mexico with a mariachi. I mean, so there just really seems to be an effort, a great effort on the part of many industries of entertainment that are bringing these celebrations. We just had the Latino Kings of Comedy at the Saginaw Temple Theater, and so I mean, there's just a lot happening, and I see a big difference. I see a bit from 5 years ago, even. But Len, let me ask you, because this is something that I know how difficult it is in the times we live in, the political climate, and when you hear so much about the border situation, and you have children, that are coming, parents are sending them from Honduras or Guatemala because of the climate that is in those countries, whether they've been devastated by hurricanes or by crime or, just outright atrocities. What do you think of when you hear about the political unrest that's making people, individuals send their kids to the North, to America, because that's kind of the story of our families, right?
Right. It's heartbreaking. And the more that hopefully you know about your own family and the history, you can relate a lot more personally to what they're going through, and hopefully have some more empathy and understanding. And obviously that's been lost in some parts of our population, but I think it's our responsibility to keep those flames alive and understandings, and bring it back to the basics of why these people are doing what they're doing. And it's no different in essence than many cultures over the years that have come to America. And it's just we happen to be living now and seeing these, but their stories are quite similar. So I think, again, that's part of why maybe it's something innate in these personalities. They're proud of who they are, and they want to speak up in their own way to talk about their accomplishments and who they are and the art they make. But I think it's potentially a reflection to remind people. And it's great to hear some of the artists more and more speaking up for the situation.
Yeah. Well, Michoacan to Michigan, I said to Mexico. This is the actual documentary, and it's going to be playing at the Saginaw Art Museum, like we said. And this is your grandparents in Valeriano, and what was her name?
Martina
Frega, and it's just a wonderful story. This is a advertiser that you see on the screen when it played at the Detroit Institute of Arts, but it's actually coming to the Saginaw Art Museum now. And I have one of our listeners in the chat room, Diana Rivera. I know you know her. She says that she would love to buy a copy for the MSU libraries to add to the voices of pioneer Latino voices in Michigan. Is it available now for sale? And she says, looking forward to seeing you, Len, at the LEAD conference in Okemos on Thursday.
Yes, very good. Look me up for sure, Deanna. Our website for the film itself is actually, we've moved on to the family website. So the best way is just to email me, michoacan@gmail.com. I kept it simple that way. And but then we'll have a more formalized process going forward for other people, because the original website needs some work right now.
Well, in 2007, I went to Morelia, and I went during Dia de los Muertos, and you're going there this year during the Dia de los Muertos time period. And I want to say to anybody who is listening out there, if you can get a chance, go during that time, because it is amazing what you will experience. And if you think, Coco was kind of, made up or whatever, it is to an extent, but there's a lot that I think they must have visited Morelia, because a lot in that movie reminded me of going back. And it's such a beautiful time in the way that they celebrate Dia de los Muertos. And I want to make sure we clarify, Dia de los Muertos is not the Mexican Halloween. It has nothing to do with how we celebrate Halloween. We could do a whole show on just that. But Len, let me hear from you about your upcoming trip to Morelia, Michoacan, and what are you anticipating this year?
Well, the quick version is about a year ago, we were going to Oaxaca for Dia de los Muertos, and my cousin invited me, and I said, hey, we're going to Mexico City. We're going to be so close to Morelia. We've got to go. So it's a 4-hour bus ride, as Larry indicated. We went up, and I think our family is welcoming and hospitable and all that. Here, Mexicans take it a whole nother step. I am just amazed. We're instantly cousins, and I mean, we are, but there's something about. So I connected with two of my cousins there. They're both retired professors, and they're authors, and they've embraced the film, and we're showing it around the country of Mexico. So a year ago, it was about 5 or 6 of us. In April, we went again and took my uncle, the last of the siblings, and he's like a god down there, Tio Daniel, and he's 86, and it was just neat to see the respect that he got and his chance, because he was one of the ones that recorded their voices. He also wrote a narrative that is even more detailed, and on top of that, he has kept our family's archives alive with a couple of other cousins. And so that was amazing. And then we decided to open it up to more of the family to experience connections with them. So I put the word out. So about 20 of my cousins, brothers, sisters, nieces, kids are going to be going there. And then my family there is holding a big reunion, and 50 different family members from around Mexico, from Mexicali and Aguascalientes and different places, they're all coming to meet us. And so just amazing get together. And I'm hoping this is the stepping stone to keep our family up here reconnected with them both ways. So
Well, I want to go.
You're more than welcome.
It's funny because it just conjures up all of when I was there and celebrated in 2007, and that trip was the reason why in 2008. This is for my Saginaw people. Maria Vela, who was the president of the Unión Cívica Mexicana, she came to me and she says, "Larry, I need help," and she was referring to something that was going on at the Civica that they needed to raise money and raise it fast. And I came back and I said, "Well, I know how I can raise the money." And I said, "Let's have a Dia de los Muertos brunch." And she says, "What's that?" And we had the first brunch that October, the end of October, and we've had them since, actually, except for during the pandemic. But we invite the community to, come bring their pictures and their paraphernalia to set up ofrendas throughout the hall. And we had pan dulce, and we had the brunch of Mexican foods, pozole, menudo, whatever it was. And the people, we had a contest for calavera face painting. And I mean, it just was a beautiful celebration. And we're going to continue that this year on November 2nd. But the point that I was trying to make was that if anybody's interested, to watch this documentary, it will set you in a stance of the mood. And that's one of the questions I have for Len, because when this documentary played initially at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and when it played earlier in Flushing High School earlier this month, it's going to be at the Saginaw Art Museum. It's surrounded by Dia de los Muertos. Can you tell me why that is?
It was a happy happenstance. As Larry and I were talking a little bit earlier, I believe as Hispanic and Latino Heritage Month is becoming more prominent, and it has been for a while, but even more so, I think we came along at the right time to have a real life example of a family. And the whole point of, one of the main points, I should say, of why I even did this project is in the spirit of Dia de los Muertos and of Coco, if you know that, is as long as you keep the stories alive, they're connected. And that's so important. And it's even easier now than it ever was. And so I think it's a natural connection of honoring our past, honoring our relatives, and giving us a little sense of connections to that past.
Yes, that's so true. And unfortunately, this week we lost Mama Coco, who was the inspiration for the movie Coco, the main character. Her name was Maria Ramirez Caballero, and she died this week at the age of 109. Can you believe that? So we want to acknowledge that, because in that story, it really has propelled Dia de los Muertos and maybe the Mexican culture in a way that we haven't seen in the past. Disney never had a movie with Mexican
it tells
heritage.
You that they're starting to understand it too. And I actually met Mama Coco on my trip in I'm
Did
kidding.
You really?
Well, when we went, they had this big family gathering. It's sort of like the Italian The Godfather scene. We're out in the country, and all these people came, and it was this big celebration, and they were cooking on the side, and I got these pictures, and it was just a simple feast. But this older woman was sitting over there, and I had to go meet her. Her name was Senora Amparito. She was a part of the family for generations. Well, one generation. But we're following up with the story because she's like 90, 100 something. She kind of looked a lot like Mama Coco. Mm-hmm. And we all have them in our family. So I think they did a good job of finding someone to represent that in our symbolic of many of our families.
And it's funny because of the similarities between our family. You mentioned her name, and my grandfather's name was Jose Vicente Preceres del Amparo. I mean, it just keeps coming up. Señor del Amparo was the
Yep.
saint of Guanacarillo, and it's just really amazing that after all these years, and we're talking 100 years from when our families came here in 1919, they crossed that border and then they headed to Michigan, for the fields of gold, if you will. That we have maintained the legacy in those stories. And it's been, for most part, in most Mexican families, word of mouth. But with the Fraga family, they were able to make tapes of their ancestors that actually crossed that border. So that's really something. In the Diaz side, we had an uncle, my uncle Esteban Diaz, who his daughter was attending Central Michigan University, my cousin Susie, and she asked him to write the family history, and he did. And it was several pages. It was beautiful, and it really told how they crossed that border into America. And he was in the land of the free. He had a way with words. It's so beautiful. So this is a continuation of that, and of when I connect with you, the Fraga family, and how the similarities are there. It's just really a beautiful thing. Really.
Well, and then I mentioned earlier the website, because all families, or most families, have collections of archives and photographs. And the problem often is, how do you, one person has those photographs, and yeah, you can make some copies, but it gets cumbersome. And that's why I went to the website to digitize it, make it all available for anybody in our family, and actually at this point, the general public, to check it out, to keep those stories alive. And I have interviews, videotapes of my mother and her sisters talking their stories, and none of it made the film. That was the research that goes into a film. Yet at the same time, they're part of the stories of the family.
Yeah. And those pictures, they're such treasures. They're gems to me, as I have collected over the 35 plus years that I have started and been involved with my Diaz family reunion. I went to most of the matriarchs of our family and I said, can I see the family pictures and the treasures that we had? The oldest one that we had was of our great grandmother, Maria, who it was a picture from the early 1900s, but it was my great grandmother Cecilia's mother. And one of the brothers that's there, he has a big sombrero of the time. I mean, like I said, they're just wonderful gems.
A photo on the screen that was my grandfather when he went back in the 30s, I think, and some brothers and brothers-in-law in the same picture. There was one with a big sombrero and a patch over his eye, and there's a story about him. So all those, it just prompts stories, if nothing else, and then you try to follow up on those. And when we go back, when I was back in April, I think we realized the arch behind those guys is in, if you know Mexican architecture at all, you just on the street, you just see a door and you get inside and they have a courtyard and all this stuff going on. And we were gathering for a picture because there's 3 homes on that street in this historical centro de Morelia that have been the families for 3 generations. In the same photo, we were standing in front of that same iconic. So, and that's why these stories live on, even though it's a moment in time back then. It's also connected with the present.
Yeah, and when I go to Morelia today, well, the last time I went was a while back, but I went to be rejuvenated in my storytelling of my book. The book that I was telling you I was writing about. It's the flight of the monarch and it's the family history. But sometimes I have writer's block and I just have to be immersed in the culture of Morelia. Please, Len, tell my listeners here about the city of Morelia, Michoacan.
I've done some traveling over the years, and parts I haven't been to in Mexico, but we've been a number of places. And I call it, I'm biased, obviously, but quintessential Mexico. I mean, when you see the Hispanic architecture in the historical downtown,
yes,
and you walk these streets, and I was just with my cousin, I said, how many steps have you taken on these little sidewalks going downtown? Because everybody walks there all the time, wherever they go, and it's countless. And you just feel like it's history, but it's also alive and now too.
Yes, you feel like you're immersed into that old days of the stories that you've been told all your life. Yes.
No, it's so I highly encourage. And in fact, a quick thing: what has grown out of our visits in the last year is we're actually working on a project. We're calling it the Erejon Fraga Chavez project, and we have other names for it, but the family down there, and we're looking at doing some exchanges between Michigan and Michoacan, academic exchanges, even the fact of visiting tourist type, because if you get a chance to, it isn't just Morelia, it's Uruapan, it's
Pátzcuaro,
Pátzcuaro,
Anitzio. Yes, yes. It's just such a beautiful region, the Michoacan, the state of Michoacan. And I know that next year, some of my family members are planning to celebrate. One of my cousins got married 30 years ago, and we're going to Mexico, and she's got a website and a group of people that are going to be attending. But we talked about leading a family tour of this area, because I do have a lot of knowledge about it, and I would love to share that with the Dias family. So if any Dias family members are out there, let's talk about this again, because I mean, it's truly a beautiful area where great grandma Cecilia was from, and grandpa Sonovio. And Len is going to be going there next week, right?
We leave Sunday for Mexico City for a couple of days, and then Morelia for about a week and a half. And if anybody else, as Larry was indicating, is interested, get in touch with me, because we have resources down there that we've been working with to, yes, my family could do it, but when you get a little bit larger group, we've actually worked with the tour guide, and in this case, an English and Spanish speaking tour guide, just to take the burden off the family. Sometimes we feel like when we come down, they do far too much for us. And so we try to lessen the load on them. But if you're ever interested, please contact me.
Well, thank you so much, Len
Rajeski. Rajeski Fraga. How's that?
Fraga. I like Fraga. Len Fraga. No, but it's been a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. We've learned so much. And again, this documentary, Michoacan to Michigan, is going to be playing at the Saginaw Art Museum October 29th, 1 p.m. during their Dia de los Muertos celebration at the Art Museum. Their third annual, and the Unión Cívica Mexicana is having their 13th annual on November the 2nd, Wednesday. And we're going to have food trucks outside celebrating our tacos and our ofrendas and so much more. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Len, again. And we will see you next week. Hasta luego. Until next week. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I just wanted to mention that I see somebody on here, Rudy and Narcista Insisto. She says, I'm so glad to see Mexican history being told. I enjoy hearing these stories. Thank you. And there's so many hearts on here from Diana Faith Gonzalez. And we have my cousin Phil. He's part of the Dias family. Phil Delgado. I lost it there. He says, thank you. But in an earlier comment, he did have smiley faces as well. So, I mean, that's the thing. It's going to be important that we continue in this dialogue and this sharing. And now that we've met, Len, I mean, we're going to go full force on this, because now that we're out of the pandemic, would love to help you in the marketing of the documentary for your family and for the greater community. So thank you again, everybody, so much. It's been a pleasure. I'm so glad that we were able to share this and tell this story. And just stay safe and take care of each other and stay warm, because now we're in the cold season. We'll see you again.